Good morning, African Stars International School learners. I'm Miss Hilma, your grade 7 Natural Science teacher. Welcome to your Natural Science e-learning lesson 11, term 2. Our topic for today is electricity. Answers to the previous activity. Number 3, urea. Urea is a waste product produced by the body in metabolizing proteins. It forms in the liver and blood moves it to the kidneys, where it is filtered out of the blood and excreted with water as urine. Now the reflex arc, now this is a protective system of the nervous system that causes quick reaction to happen. For instance, if you put your hand on the hot plate of a stove, you remove it faster than your brain has time to process the information. So this helps the body prevent injuries. Now the parts of the central nervous system, these are the brain and the spinal column or cord. And then number 2, the peripheral nervous system is the nerve fibers and the nerves ending. And drugs affect the body by dulling and stimulating the brain. And they do this by affecting the brain's chemistry or the chemistry of the nerve fibers. Now here in this slide, I just want you to have a view of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system so that you can be able to identify it from pictures or from any diagram. So we say the central nervous system, it contains of the brain and the spinal cord, as you can see it here. And then the peripheral nervous system contains of the nerve fibers and the nerves endings, as it can be observed in the picture here. So please be able to identify these pictures in any picture, of course, and of course be able to label them. Thank you. Now our topic for today, electricity. Okay, so we are going to discuss static electricity today. Okay, so just a quick recap on our previous topics. We talked about matter. We say matter is anything that has mass and occupies space. And then we also say that matter is made up of small particles called atoms. Okay, so that's why we say an atom is the smallest building block of matter. Okay, now these atoms are also made up of smaller particles called protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, now we said protons are positively charged and electrons, they don't have a charge, and electrons are negatively charged. Okay, now if an atom has a charge, it means that there is an imbalance between its numbers of protons and electrons. Okay, now an atom with a negative charge has more electrons than protons. So in other words, a negatively charged atom has more negative charges than positive charges. Okay, and an atom with a positive charge has more protons than electrons. So in other words, it means that a positive charged atom has more positive charges than negative charges. Good. Now let's talk about charging by friction. Okay, so objects can become charged during everyday activities. Okay, some of you might experience these activities. For example, you may see small sparks when you take off your jersey. This is mostly happens in dry conditions or when it is dry. Or maybe your hair may stand on the end when you brush them or when you comb them. And you can give someone a small shock when you drag your feet along a carpet and then you touch them. Okay, so some of these things are really very typical examples of daily activities that we might experience. Now let's talk about charging using friction. Okay, so atoms are normally neutral. Okay, so the appearance of atoms are like, okay, or let's say atoms in nature are normally neutral until you rub them or until you apply friction to them. Okay, so when objects rubs against each other, okay, or when friction is applied to objects, electrons are transferred from one object to another. Okay, so the object that gets more electrons become negatively charged, and the object that loses electrons becomes positively charged. Now I want you to note this. Only electrons leave an object, but not protons. Protons remain the same. So in other words, an object does not lose protons at all. Okay, it only loses electrons. Okay, so this leaves what? Protons the same. Are we clear here? Good. Now, the effect of charged objects. Okay, so what is electricity? So this is the movement of large number of charges. Okay, so electricity is a movement of large numbers of charges. Now, these charges carry electrical energy. Okay, so these charges carry electrical energy. Now, objects become charged when they are rubbed. Okay, so once they are charged, they can attract other objects. So when objects become charged when they are rubbed. So in other words, when you rub objects, they become charged. Okay, and then once they are charged, then they can then attract other objects. For example, when you rub a comb, it becomes charged and attract your hair. Okay, and then when you rub a ruler, it becomes charged and it attracts pieces of paper. Now, this leads us to the definition of static electricity. Okay, so which is the electricity that results when electric charge is made when rubbing something. Okay, so this is the type of electricity that results when electric charge is made when rubbing something. Now, just to view the examples that we have talked about earlier, that when you comb your hair, electrons are transferred between the hair and the comb. Okay, so electrons are transferred from the hair to the comb, which leaves what? Which leaves the hair positively charged, meaning it has more protons, and then the comb gain electrons, then it becomes negatively charged. Hence, the hair stands when you bring the comb back to the hair. Very clear here. So what happens during combing hair? Electrons are transferred from the hair to the comb, and this leaves the hair positively charged, and the comb, since it gains the electrons, it becomes negatively charged. Hence, they attract each other. So, what we have talked about today, we have talked about just atoms in general. They are made up of smaller particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. And then we also talked about their charges. And then we say that for an atom to be charged, there must be an imbalance between numbers of protons and electrons. And then we also talked about a friction that happens, or let's say friction that happens in our daily activities, which leads to objects being charged. Okay, and then now we talked about atoms being neutral in nature, and then only become charged when friction is applied to them. And then we also note that electrons do not leave an object at all. Okay, so electrons leave an object, but protons do not leave an object or an atom. We define electricity, and we also now also defines what static electricity is, and we gave you the example that we discussed earlier in the form of a picture. No activity for today, so we have come to the end of today's lesson. Remember to stay safe, stay at home, wash your hands, wear a mask when you leave your house, and avoid public gatherings so that can help fight COVID-19. I thank you.